All right, my name is Sarah Seamount. I'm the Migrant Coordinator for Idaho, and today's mini training is on the year-end wrap-up. These are things that we have to do every year, but I think it's nice to kind of look at what our requirements are so that we can know that when September 23rd rolls around and we roll over into a new year in our wonderful database MSIS, that everything is done and complete. So we're going to go through everything that I suggest that you do to make sure your data is complete. And so with that, we'll continue on. So what does happen at the end of the year? Well, we have on our website, and it is already updated for 22-23. We have a due dates place where you can go click on that link and you will be able to see all of the due dates for the year, even the ones that are not hard due dates, but are suggestions to help you keep on track to have everything done during the year. But the most important one right now is the one that's coming up. This is one of our two critical due dates. And for this year, it will be September 16th. All of your data collection and all of your data in MSIS should be up to date and complete for the 21-22 year. And as most of you know, our performance period starts on September 1st and goes around till August 31st. So that means that all of the data that you're putting into MSIS relate to the performance period that is ending next week. And then, so the due date is the 16th. That will give me a week to approve all of the data collection, and the rollover will happen on the 23rd. And Julie, so we have somebody who isn't muted. If you could figure out that and get them muted, that would be great. All right, so what do we need to have done? We need to have our data collection done and before we reach the rollover, and that includes two parts, a re-interview summary, which most of you had done, I believe, last spring in May, and then your MPO evaluations. Those evaluations may have been done last spring, but for most districts that were providing summer services, they would not be completed until the end of summer school, which means for many of you, that was just recent. And we also have to approve the data collection. So I need about a week to do that. Last year, I didn't leave myself that week, and so it was a little crazy trying to get them done on the last day before the rollover. So we've asked that all of your data be turned in by the 16th, and then I will have those all approved by the 23rd. Occasionally, we do have to go back and forth, and I have to ask for some clarification or a comment of some kind. So having that extra week is going to help us be able to move back and forth if we need to. But generally speaking, these are very easy to approve and don't take long. So the second thing that I wanted to share with you was a year-end data checklist. Part of this was in a mini training last spring, but this has been updated to just be kind of for the year end. So this is to get ready for the rollover. Data collection, we talked about the complete re-interview summary report. You should also complete your MPO evaluation for all selected MPOs. And we're going to actually go look at these after the recorded part is over so you can kind of see what that looks like. And so all of your MPOs that you anticipated doing should be completed, including those related to summer school. You will submit that by September 16th. 8 of you are already done, so congratulations. I have not started approving those, but I will, after you submit them, I will approve them. I will be going on vacation starting tomorrow. We work year round, so I've been here all summer, and I'm very much looking forward to spending some time with grandchildren and with my parents. So I will be out from tomorrow through Labor Day. I will be back on September 6th, and I will begin to approve these just as soon as I return, or possibly before then, but I would look for it then. One of the improvements to MSIS that we made was that you can now see if you've been approved. It doesn't require me to send you an email. You don't have, I mean, just go right back to your data collection and it will say approved and it will show my name or initials or something like that. So that was something we added so that you would be able to see that. I also have a report that I can run that allows me to see on a grid all the districts and who's submitted, what their current status is. And I may share that if if that's at all helpful to people. So you can just scroll down the list and say, oh, here I am. Yes, I'm done. I'm approved. So there's a lot of different ways that we can help to keep on top of this. The second half of the checklist is kind of all of the other data that's not included in the data collection. So the first thing to do is to verify that all your services are complete for the regular year. And it is in the regular year that you will also see PFS status. And as you know, if a student is enrolled in school, they will receive a funding unit for that. And the funding unit for 22-23 is $577. If the student is PFS, when we pull those numbers for the funding for next year, we're looking at PFS for always for the year that we're in, but it's still important to make sure that that's in for the year that's just ending, because we report that to the federal government as well. But if you have a student who's attending school, they get one funding unit. If the student is identified as priority for services based on the guidelines that are on our website, because we do have guidance, then you also get a second funding unit for those students who are priority for services. The second thing to do is to verify all services and dates are entered for summer services. And again, if a student receives summer services and are entered into the system with a beginning and an ending date that are while the student is eligible for the migrant program, you will get another funding unit. So if you have a student who is attending school during the regular year, identified as PFS, and is receiving summer services from the prior year, those students will receive 3 times the total funding unit. So more than $1,500 more than $1,600 for this year's students. So it's really, really important that all this data be entered into the system. It's the only way we know how to allocate your funds. The next thing to do, and this has to do with how we do our federal reporting, is to ensure that any student whose eligibility ended during this performance period, which remember is from September 1st to August 31st, if their eligibility ends, that you make the determination whether or not that student needs to receive continuation of services, which is allowable. It's a permissive authority under the law. And so please follow the guidance that you'll find at our website in order to make sure that you've done that for every student whose eligibility ended this year. And then next, you will also need to enter your high school equivalency or graduation dates. So this means if a student got a GED or graduated from school, it's really critically important to get that date in there. And you do that through your migrant summary. You go find the student and then you change their status from enrolled to graduated or received GED. And that's important because, again, we need to report accurate data. Now, I will tell you, I know last year there was a problem where people would enter the graduation date and the student would disappear from their summary. I believe that has been corrected, and that the student will not disappear from your migrant summary until after the rollover, as they should, if they already graduated or received a GED. The last thing that I would ask you to look at, and maybe in some ways the most important aspect of what we do for our year-end data cleanup, is to go to the bad dates report. That's the bad residency verification dates report. I'm going to show you in just a couple of minutes how to do that live. I won't be able to put that in the recording for the website because, of course, there would be student data that even if I hide it, it wouldn't be quick enough. So I may add some screenshots to this presentation to send out for those who are not going to see the actual demonstration here. But let me just say the bad dates are important because what they mean are that there is a residency verification date for that child that will not allow that child to be counted in the federal government's allocation to states. So, for example, if we have a child who is 2 years old, I don't know, in March, and you did their residency verification date back in maybe when they arrived in November, unfortunately, because the residency verification date shows that the child was 2 when it was done, that child will not count for funding for Idaho, because we only receive funding for students, for children who are 3 through 21 and have not yet graduated from high school. So therefore, we really do need to check back and we say, oh, look, this child has now turned 3. I am going to call that family and make sure that they're still here in Idaho, verify that they're still here. And for the preschooler, the 3-year-old, I'm going to change their residency verification date to a date that is after their 3rd birthday. You do have to wait until the child does turn 3 to make that change. And it's only that child that needs to be changed. If you verified the other children in the family at an earlier date, that's perfectly fine. But for those 3-year-olds that are turning 3 or students who are turning 3 this year, it's really important to make sure that the student's verification date is on or after their 3rd birthday. And I will tell you that the nice thing about this report is it will tell you if the student's residency verification date is before their 3rd birthday. So that's an important thing to look at. Another thing that's important to look at is, because this report tells you what it is that's a problem with the date, it will tell you if it's missing. It will tell you if the date is after the child's 22nd birthday. It will tell you if the date is after the student's graduation date, because once the student graduates, they're no longer eligible for the program. We only go through graduation. Students that are older are out of school youth, and then we can serve them until they're older, up until their 22nd birthday, but we cannot serve students in the program after the day they graduate. So that's the other reason it's important to put graduation dates in, and maybe while you're there, check and make sure that you don't have any students on your bad dates report that show now that they are after their graduation date. So really making sure that those dates align properly is super important for us to get all of our data correct for submission to the federal government. I'm trying to think of the other things that could cause a bad date. So the student's too old, the student's already graduated, the student's too young. There could be that their residency verification date was after their end of eligibility. Obviously, we can't do that either. It has to be before their eligibility ends. Another bad date might be that the student's eligibility hadn't yet started when you did the residency verification date. So if the student is not yet eligible for the program, that date isn't a date that will allow us to count them as a migrant student during the performance period. It does have to be after the student was identified. Now, for students who are in their first year in your district, remember your eligibility is for 3 years, but during the first year on their COE, you can use any date, pretty much any date on the COE, as your date to establish residency. You can use their QAD, you can use your interview date, which is your signature date. You can use the parent's signature date because essentially they were here if they signed the COE. I would tend to maybe use your own signature date because that's, a date where you were communicating with the parent. If you have a student who you did not get a residency verification date into the system and the student has moved away or the family has moved away, the one way that you can, as a last resort to establish a good residency verification date, look in your school information system, whether it's PowerSchool or Infinite Campus, or there's several others, but you can look in your system and you can find a date where the student was both enrolled in school and not absent. So if there's a way that you can check based on your school information system to show that the student was present in school on that day, then you can use that date. I really do want for every family to be contacted every year. I think that's super important. We had a residency verification date form that we sent out that we'd like for districts to use. We'll be talking about that in fall training, because I think it is critically important that we find out what the needs of our families are. And we also want to make sure that if there's potentially a move that's been made since we last talked to them, that we find out that we could get a new COE and therefore extend their eligibility by another 3 years. There are a lot of good reasons to do the residency verification date checks in person or at least on the phone. However, as a last resort, if you missed getting a date, then you can use the date that you can show with evidence, meaning your school information system, that the student was present. Another thing to think about is when you look at that bad dates report, one of the last columns says, is this the current COE? And if the answer is no, then you probably cannot fix that date. You can't go in and add it or change it now. What that means is that they've moved out of your district and they've moved to another Idaho district. And in that Idaho district, we have identified the student as a migrant, and we have done a new COE, or that new district did a new COE, and they no longer are going to show in any data that you have. You can't change their services, residency verification date, or anything else. So it's important to stay caught up on those things. And especially when a student leaves your district, to make sure all of that is caught up, because we know that that child may well be identified in another Idaho district. And when the new COE is signed and approved, that student will no longer show in any of the data that you see. They will show in their new district. So that's something to keep in mind. The last thing, the last thing I wanted to talk about before we conclude this recording is that there has been one big change. And this, I don't remember if I've put this out there to everyone before now. The way that the federal government is going to get our numbers for funding used to be through a report that we submitted called the Consolidated State Performance Report, or CSPR. And that's submitted in the fall, or actually in December. That was the way it used to be, and that's the way it's always been. And we work long and hard every year to make sure that that report is as absolutely accurate as we can make it. As of this year, they are going to take that data from M6. So the 3-year average of our students that we've identified in the state will come from our M6 numbers. And for this year, and then I believe the prior 2 years will still be from CSPR. So this year, only the current year will be from M6. Next year, it'll be this year and next year, and one prior year's CSPR. And then in the third year, all 3 years will come from M6. So the data that we are really, really trying to get as accurate as we possibly can is our M6 data. And as you know, our MSIS data is what feeds M6 3 times a week. So the data that we put into MSIS, the data that you put into MSIS will actually directly affect our funding with no filter through me. So that means that we're really counting on districts to get the data right. And the data that's going to be the most critically important is the data that allows us to count a student either for the regular year, meaning residency verification dates are critical, or the dates that the student attended summer school, because that's the other thing. The 3-year rolling average of our identified count is one thing that gets us funding. The other thing is the number of students we serve in the summer, as simple as that. So the federal government's formula only includes those 2 factors. So it is super important that we make sure that we are including our accurate residency verification dates and our summer services dates. So now that it's going to be coming from M6, Julissa is doing a ton of work on doing our M6 reconciliation, where we verify based on what we would have normally reported for CSPR in the old days, and what M6 is going to count, we try to make sure that those two lists match up perfectly and that every child that we would count, they would count. And every child they're going to count, if there's some that we would not have, we want to know why and make sure that we would have counted them. So we're really working hard, Julissa and I both, and I've been working on it for 2 years. Julissa's been working on it the entire year she's been in this position, to get it as accurate as humanly possible. So these dates are really important. Julissa will be running a new reconciliation next week. Well, she's actually already run it today, but she'll run it from M6 next week. And we'll be looking at, are there any data issues? And she will be contacting you if there are. We'll run it again in probably October, just to make sure that we're right on. And then again, just before they pull the numbers in December. So you'll definitely be hearing more on this topic as the fall progresses. And essentially Julissa will reach out to you if there's something that is a concern, a data point that's inaccurate or seems to be inaccurate. She'll be reaching out to you through through an email saying, please check in the SFTP in our secure site. I've uploaded a file. Please verify these dates or tell me why this is the way it is. And it's really important when she starts that process that people get back to her quickly. So we'll just kind of throw that out there. But the data that you're putting in now is the data that will be feeding M6 for our funding for the 23-24 school year. So thank you very much for watching this. I'm going to stop the recording now, and we'll have a couple of quick demonstrations and plenty of time for questions.